Welcome to Brotherhood, a spoiler-filled podcast where we review each episode of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. My name is Dylan MacArthur, the older brother.
And my name is Timothy MacArthur, the taller brother.
Today's episode, Father Before the Grave.
The heartwarming story of a zombie whose bucket list includes biting his own father.
If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. So did you take notes for this episode, Tim?
Yeah, I took notes.
Sweet, we both took notes this time.
One of my notes doesn't even have to do with the story or nitpicking about anything. It's just something funny I noticed in the episode.
There's just so much to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and lead since I have more notes than you. And if at any point...
I've only got like 3 notes.
If at any point in this episode we hit one of those notes, feel free to stop me and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
So we begin this episode the same way that we ended the last episode, which is with Hohenheim standing at the grave of Trisha Elric and Edward standing right behind him wondering, what the freak? This is an interesting moment in the show because at this point, Hohenheim and Father look suspiciously like the same person, and we're not quite sure if they're the same or not. So, seeing Hohenheim suddenly appear in front of Edward after the death of Lust looks very, very suspicious. Fortunately, though, that turns out to be a curveball because Hohenheim isn't really there to instill the fear of God in Edward. He actually seems kind of surprised that Edward is there at all. Mostly, Hohenheim is there in order to prompt Edward to dig up the grave of the thing that he brought back to life in episode 2.
Another thing that I find strange about Hohenheim is that he confronts Edward about him doing human transmutation. I'm like, dude, you shouldn't be confronting them about that if they did it because they didn't have a parental figure there.
There is a little bit of a you're one to talk thing here. The thing, though, about that line was that we expect a fight. We expect some sort of altercation to take place. But instead, it ends on a fairly quiet and pointed note, which kind of changes the direction of the rest of the episode, because really, a lot of stuff happens in this episode, but in terms of strict action, there isn't a whole lot to this episode.
Yeah.
It has a very different pace than the previous two.
Yep.
The next important scene that we get is Hohenheim sitting at the table with Pinocchio, where he plants the seed into her mind and vicariously also through Edward, because of course he almost touched Edward's hair, which has the magical power of bringing a character who shouldn't know there's someone in the room straight from sleep. So he knows that Edward is going to be listening as well. That there's a possibility that the thing which Edward transmuted in episode 2 might not have actually been their mother. And that becomes the inciting incident, the thrust of the rest of the episode. There was a little shot here, I don't know if you caught it, where Hohenheim is talking to Pinocchio, and he takes a drink from a glass of wine.
Yeah, I saw that.
Dylan from the past, when he saw this moment, was immediately reminded very excitedly about the moment a few episodes prior when another Hohenheim-looking creature had drunk from a glass of suspicious red substance, and his brain was exploding with the parallelism. Of course, Dylan from the future, who knows what's coming up next, knows that, first off, that probably wasn't an intentional parallel shot that was being set up, but it works nonetheless because, of course, red in this show is a symbol for the question, what is the value of a human life? And Hohenheim, for reasons that will be revealed later on, perfectly embodies this question of the value of human life. Anything else that you have to say before we head back to Al?
Nope.
Our next important scene is Ling talking to Al. He's super impressed because Al supposedly has this perfect body that can't feel pain and doesn't get tired and it's immortal. And Al's like, nah.
It will eventually reject me. We learned that last episode. It will eventually spit out my soul and I won't be able to use this body anymore.
In a lot of action-based shows, it it can feel like the only way to properly raise the stakes of what's going on is to have a character die or be threatened with death. But in this instance, we're not really threatening Al with anything. His life isn't in danger. We're just being told, by the way, there is a limit. We're not hitting that limit yet, but it is out there, and there's a possibility that we will hit it in the future. And that is a nice way of raising the stakes without having to use any action or directly threaten the life of a character.
Okay.
Avatar does this in the very first episode of season 2, where Aang gets to learn about the Avatar state and be like, you know what? It sounds like you've got this super awesome power going on, but actually it's a problem because if you get hurt during that stage, you'll die. He's not in any actual danger in that episode, but we know that something is going to happen later on that is going to take advantage of that and then put his life in danger.
Yep.
Both as a writer and as a reader, I really enjoy watching writers lay the foundation of things to come, more so than I think I actually enjoy the payoff sometimes. But that's just me. It's done very well. Moving on. After that, the next big thing is Hohenheim leaving the house. And Dylan from the past is going to come back in here to say that it's really unclear when he takes the photograph of him if he's taking it for sentimental reasons, because it's like, this is a picture of my whole family before everything went wrong, or if it's him trying to remove any traces that he was there. Because then he says to Pinocchio, you need to leave this country.
And Pinocchio's like, nah, I ain't leaving. There are people who need me here. And I'm like, Pinocchio, that's actually kind of a good reason to stay.
It is a good reason to stay, but it nonetheless does feel like Hohenheim at this point might possibly be trying to cover up his tracks because something is about to happen and he doesn't want people to be able to connect any dots.
Okay.
But we don't know that, and that's one of the reasons that I like this moment, is that it's unclear and it's going to become more important later on. We're going to have the details. It's going to become more rich, more fulfilling, more exciting from a story perspective. What kind of a relationship did Hohenheim and Pinocchio have before everything?
My guess is they were, like, drinking buddies or something. I don't know.
Because the way that he says goodbye to her, it's cold, obviously. This entire character is just the embodiment of callousness and cold-heartedness, or at least a cold-hearted exterior.
Yeah.
And yet, in his conversation with her as he says goodbye, it's fairly touching, as if these are two really old friends who have known each other for a long time.
I think they are friends, or at least were friends, like great friends or something. But that's about it.
Another great way of building character while we still don't fully understand or know the character's motivations. Okay, now for the big set piece of the whole episode.
Edward and Pinocchio, what's her face?
Pinocchio.
Go to dig up Pinocchio. Go to dig up Ed's mother's grave thing, and Edward starts puking and digging up his mother's grave. And my thought process is, you're puking, Edward. You shouldn't be digging up your mother's body in the rain while you're puking.
Even before he admits to us that he is about to dig up the grave, there's this kind of sinking feeling as we watch this that, oh, he's about to dig up a dead body. That's kind of gross. Like, there is a kind of sick feeling watching this moment. Certainly not helped by the fact that we're seeing actual puke expel from Edward's mouth.
Yeah.
But it's only worsened by the fact that, like any good gothic horror story, the rain is coming in just as Edward is about to get his darkest and most desperate. This is not a good time to dig up a body. You want it to be dry, because otherwise you're going to be wet, you're going to be miserable, and the mud is just not going to cooperate. But they push through anyway, because this is magic rain that appears whenever things are dramatic. And is nobody else freaked out by the fact that Pinocchio has a shocking knowledge of the human anatomy?
she is an automail expert. I'm sure that probably comes with the territory.
Yeah, but that's more of a mechanical job than it is having to know, oh, the femur is normally this long and the pelvis bone has exactly this angle. There's no way this could be a female.
Well, also, Panako is related to New Winry's parents, who were doctors, not just automail mechanics, but doctors. So maybe
But being related to a doctor doesn't make oneself an anatomical expert.
Yeah, I know, but still, I don't know. Maybe it's something. Maybe it's just knowledge that. Maybe it's knowledge. Maybe it's knowledge.
I like to think that in a past life, Pinocchio was a black market doctor. She
Okay,
was like she had to obtain this medical knowledge somehow through practical experience, but that the way that she obtained it wasn't necessarily the most wholesome method.
Well, she does seem like someone who could also be in that business and survive.
She's pretty tough.
Yeah, she seems pretty tough.
After digging up the body, they discover that no, there's no way that this could possibly have been Trisha because the hair color is completely wrong. Trisha was chestnut colored. This entire thing was colored black. And the pelvis was apparently that of a male, which is a very specific thing to know. Like, that's the only thing that you could know after seeing many pelvis bones. Being able to identify it just by the look. You don't acquire that knowledge from book smarts. That's all I'm saying. Oh, there's a great line, though, that caps this off. Edward turns to the camera after realizing what is going on, and he says, I'm not going to run away, which is, of course, harkening back to the beginning of the episode when Hohenheim accuses him of having run away from the situation. But there's another layer to this running away theme that is going on, and that's he's not going to run away from Nina. He's not going to run away from the horrors of alchemy anymore. He's going to face them, and he's going to master them.
I get you.
This is the conclusion of an arc that started all the way back then when Mustang said to Edward, if you're going to live in this world, you have to be willing to stand where you are and make decisions in the moment. You can't just run away.
I see now.
This is a bigger character moment than it looks to be on the surface. Also, this is one of the few times that we get to see Pinocchio's eyes.
Yep.
And boy, does that hurt. Watching her, even though, like, literally, she is a cartoon. She's not even human. She's not even a piece of paper. She is just pixels on a screen. And yet, watching the expression on her face as Edward is digging up that body, it hurts.
Yeah, it does.
So much. Because you feel the love and the concern that she has for this boy that she has yelled bean sprout at for many of his years.
You're so short.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what she has said to him.
And then upon making this crucial discovery, Edward goes back. And the note that I have about this is that we don't see the goodbye. We hear it, but we don't see it. What we see is Edward on the train going back home. And this is a nice instance of time compression, where the only two things that we need to know are that he's leaving and that he's going to Central. And having the audio of Edward saying goodbye to Granny Pinocchio while he's actually on the train headed to Central helps to compress that time, helps to keep things dramatic and dynamic so that we can ride the high of this dramatic moment all the way to the end of the episode.
It was a good episode. Next part of it is, when does Ed call Izumi again?
I can't remember when. At some point, Ed calls Izumi to be like, by the way, your child, was its hair the same as your, or I don't know, something like basically planting the same seed that Hohenheim had planted in him so that she can also be a gravedigger and Dig up the body of a dead child. This is so creepy.
Anyways, another creepy fact. The sign in Izumi and Sig's shop says Happy Meat. Just thought I'd point that out.
Ed goes back to Central and he starts talking to Al and being like, I've just discovered something important, which is that somehow the knowledge that the dead can't be brought to life means that you can absolutely for sure get a body. And there's a way to do it, which we kind of figured already, but we really mean it this time. There is a way for you to get your body. I don't really have anything to say about this part of the episode other than I love these two characters.
And then, and Al turns out to have been the thing that they transmutate, whatever, in that one.
Was something that bothered me. This was something that bothered me so much about the Chimera episode, which is when the blood hits Al's blood seal, and he suddenly has this flashback of not only seeing truth, but suddenly being inside the body that they had attempted to bring their mother to life in. This had been haunting me for episodes and episodes, and finally getting to see it felt a little late, but I was so happy to see that come back and finally tie everything together.
But that also means that Pinako killed Al, and no one's disturbed by that fact.
No, she didn't kill Al.
Why?
Because
no. Here's the thing. She put that beast down. So that means that Al...
Which means that we have an interesting timeline here, because that means that Edward didn't bring his brother back until after the thing was put out of its misery by Pinako.
Or maybe,
Could we have stumbled upon a plot hole?
Now that I think about it, we might have.
I don't care. I'm totally fine.
Or maybe Pinako, or maybe it was dead before Pinako arrived, and Pinako just wanted to ensure that it was dead.
I'm pretty sure that they say in episode 2 that she was the one who put it out of its misery. But yeah, that okay. So I'm gonna look this up. I'm gonna look this up right now. FMA Pinako Rock Bell.
I still kind of find it hilarious that the sign in Shikanazumi's shop says Happy Meat. I don't know why I find it so funny. I just do. I think it's hilarious.
Okay, so I can't find anything to answer our question, so it may actually be a legitimate plot hole, but I was able to find out, just glancing over her biography on the Full Metal Alchemist Wikia, that apparently she was the one who helped to deliver Edward and Alphonse when they were born. So it sounds to me like she might actually be trained in medical stuff formally. Possibly.
So that would explain why she knew what a male pelvis looked like.
But you still have to see a lot of pelvises in order to identify whether or not one is male or female just by sight.
Maybe she was in a war or something like that.
That I would totally be willing to believe. So it looks like we have stumbled across a plot hole, but that's okay because it's the kind of plot hole that you can easily forgive.
Yeah.
It's not the sort of thing that this is a crucial detail that we must know. It's one of those things that maybe it was overlooked a little bit, or maybe we're just missing something. Either way, it doesn't ruin the story.
Maybe the beast, maybe the idea is that the soul isn't necessarily required to survive. It is required to live consciously, but maybe the idea is that you don't exactly need it to necessarily...
Oh, but there is that line about how Ed's soul was rejected.
So maybe the beast, maybe the creature already technically had a soul, and that's why Al's soul was rejected. And so the creature could have had a soul beforehand, and then but it wasn't necessarily human, of course. Especially since what they made couldn't have been human, mostly because they used the wrong ingredients, from what I've learned. They used the wrong amounts. So what they made could not have been human, because then it would have been dead either, because then it wouldn't have even lasted as long as it did. So my guess is that Alphonse's soul somehow got into that body. Well, it had a different soul, and because the body wasn't necessarily human, his soul was eventually rejected because it was like, nah, don't belong here kind of thing, you know? So that's my guess, is that the body already had a soul, and that's why Granny Pineko was able to kill it.
Who knows? We don't knows.
It could have been a brand new kind of soul. Like, maybe they made some form of animal, for all we know, that looks vaguely like a human corpse. A very disturbing human corpse.
The really nice thing about this episode, I mean, it's a good episode overall, but I think the thing that really makes it for me is the fact that it finally puts a bookend on the previous several episodes in which the Elric brothers have kind of meandered in terms of motivation. We saw the writers try and introduce this kind of moral quandary, I mean, as far back as Nina, but really trying to bring it full force, starting with the Chimera episodes, that these brothers just aren't sure if they can go forward or how or what.
It's like the kind of book they need to find is not one about getting their buddies back. It's a book about finding their motivation. That's about it.
And this finally brings a close on that chapter where the Elric brothers can finally say confidently, this is what we want. And we know more or less how we're going to go about getting it. So don't worry, audience. We know what we're going to do next episode. Thank heavens.
Thank goodness.
Because getting to this point was kind of a slog.
Finally, we don't have to slog through the swamp of Edward and Alphonse basically doing nothing.
Because let's be honest, these characters aren't that interesting when they aren't sure of what they want. In fact, what makes them interesting is how raw and human the things are that they want. Edward wants to be taller. Like, that's not necessarily a noble thing, but it's so relatable. Al, he wants to sleep at night. That's relatable. Both of them want to get their bodies back, which is a little bit, not all of us are that way, but some of us can relate to that. But more importantly, like we have these aspects of these characters that are identifiable.
Anyone who's lost a limb or something, I'm sure, can relate to Edward to a certain degree.
We identify these characters for wanting things, not for being good. And so when we see characters suffering through moral dilemmas, we might be able to sympathize with them. We might be able to feel bad for them, but that's not a very relatable quandary, or at least not as relatable as wanting something.
Whereas insomnia, people can relate to, I think everyone's had some form of like unable to go to sleep or something like that, so.
I have a question.
What?
Why do you think more people identify with Edward than do with Alphonse?
Maybe it's because Alphonse is far more perfect seeming. Like, he just seems a lot more perfect than Edward.
Would it be fair to say that he is more good?
Yeah. I guess it could have to do with the way people see themselves is why they relate to Edward more.
I'll be honest, the person that I identify the most with is Al, but I do...
I don't know who I identify with more personally. I lean sort of towards Al more. But there are things with Edward that I definitely identify with.
There is a certain naivete to Al that I can absolutely identify with, which isn't to say that Edward also isn't naive. They make a point throughout the show, other characters saying, both of you are incredibly naive. You have no idea the way the real world works. but certainly Al knows a little bit less than Ed. And I can totally relate to that.
I think I can relate to that more than you. I'm more naive than you.
No, I'm more naive.
I'm more naive.
Glad we got that cleared up. Who knows what we would have done without that knowledge.
Yeah, we all know. We all know who is the more naive out of both of us. We all know the answer to that. I have no idea why this argument even started.
There's one more note that I want to make before we close.
Yes?
I love the music to this series.
Yep.
However, it's pretty clear that one of the things that they did in order to cut costs was, rather than write a new score for each episode, what they did at the very beginning was record an entire soundtrack of songs, more or less, that could then be used as the soundtrack. And so, measure for measure, pieces that were used in episode 1 continue to be used all the way to the end of the show.
Which at certain points doesn't work too well.
This is the point at which it starts to taper off. This might be one of the last few episodes where the reuse of music really kind of works. I think that they would have fared much better if, instead of using the same soundtrack of music for the entire show, they had worked it in phases, so that like the first 20 episodes, they have their own list of tracks that they use. And then the next phase of music, it might use a couple of those, certainly the ones that are most important and most memorable, but it would by and large use a new score. And the same for the next 20 episodes and so on till the end. Actually, I think that would have made it towards the end. But this is the point at which it works here, but from here on out, the music kind of gets a little old. And because we have heard the track so many times within the series, they start to lose their power.
I agree.
Of course, anime has always had this problem of not being able to use music particularly effectively. It's just more noticeable when a show manages to do it right for so much of the time.
Yep. So, are we going to leave on that? Are we going to leave that note?
That's as good a note as any, I think.
Okay. Goodbye.
Goodbye.